My name is Danny Reyes. I am 34 years old. I work the night shift at Blackstone Shipyard, and this is the story of what happened there and what I found and what I lost along the way. I am writing it down the way I remember it, plain and simple, because I think people should know. I need to start with my life before any of this happened because it matters. You have to know how normal things were. I have a daughter. Her name is Mia. She is 9 years old. Her mom left us when Mia was 4. I don't talk about that much. It happened, and then it was just me and Mia, and that was our life. I raised her mostly on my own, with some help from my sister who lives a few states away. Mia is smart. She likes drawing horses and she hates broccoli, and she still sleeps with a stuffed rabbit that's missing one eye. I tell you this because I want you to understand why I did what I did later, and why I was so scared the whole time I was doing it. I took the job at Blackstone 2 years before any of this started. It's an old shipyard on the edge of town, right on the water. The place has been there since the 1940s. Half the buildings are falling apart, rust everywhere, old cranes that don't move anymore just standing there like dead trees. Hulls of ships sitting in dry dock, some half taken apart for scrap, some just sitting there for no reason anybody could tell me. There's a chain link fence around the whole property, patched in spots with new wire that doesn't match the old rusted wire. At night, the place is mostly empty, just me and 1 or 2 other guys. I took the job because it paid better than anything else I could find in town, and because I have Mia to think about. I am not the kind of guy who goes looking for trouble. I want to say that clearly right at the start. I needed a paycheck. That's it. That's all I wanted. My job was basic, maintenance and watch duty. I checked equipment. I walked the yard. I made sure nothing caught fire, nothing flooded, nothing broke down that shouldn't break down. I wasn't high up in that company. I never saw the paperwork. I never went to meetings. I did my rounds and I went home. My routine back then was so simple it's almost boring to write down, but I want to write it down anyway, because later small changes to it were the only warning I got. I clocked in at 10 at night. First I walked the north dock, then the warehouses, then the dry dock basin where the broken ships sat. I took my coffee break around 1 in the morning, usually in the little break room with the bad lighting and the vending machine that ate your dollar half the time. I did paperwork around 5. I clocked out at 6:30 and drove home while the sky was just starting to go gray. I slept while Mia was at school. I picked her up. We had dinner. She did homework or drew her horses. I put her to bed. Then I went back to work and did it all again. That was my life. I want you to see how normal it was, because normal is what makes the strange things stand out. About 3 weeks into the part of this story that matters, I noticed a ship in the yard that hadn't been there the night before. That doesn't sound like much. Ships come and go at a shipyard. That's the whole point of the place. But this one came in wrong. No announcement, no dock crew waiting for it, which there always is when a ship comes in, because you need people to tie it up and check it in. No paperwork clipboard hanging on the gate, which there always is too. I noticed it because I notice patterns. 2 years of walking the same yard every night will do that to you. You know what's supposed to be there and what isn't. I asked Pete about it the next morning. Pete was the day's shift supervisor, an older guy, thinning hair, always looked a little tired. I caught him on my way out, still in my work boots, and I said, "Hey, that ship that came in last night, the one with no paperwork, what's that about?" Pete looked at me for a second too long. Then he said, "Above my pay grade," and walked off fast, like he didn't want to keep talking to me, like the conversation was already over before I'd finished my question. I thought that was odd. I felt a small itch of curiosity, the kind you get when something doesn't add up but isn't your problem. But I was tired and I had to get home to relieve my sister, who'd stayed with Mia that morning, and by the time I got in my truck, I'd already mostly let it go. That's what real life is like. You notice something strange and then your kid needs breakfast and you forget about it. A few nights later, I was doing my warehouse walk and I found a padlock on Warehouse 6. Warehouse 6 had always been open. It was mostly empty, used for storing scrap metal, nothing valuable, nothing anybody cared about. Now there was a heavy new chain on it, the kind of chain you'd use if you didn't want somebody getting in by accident. Not just a regular lock, a serious one. I went to check the office to ask about it, but the office was empty that night. There was a new set of keys hanging on the board that didn't match the pattern of the old key ring. I stood there for a minute looking at those keys, and I remember feeling something in my stomach, not fear exactly, just a kind of unease, like walking into a room where the furniture's been moved and you can't say why it bothers you. I didn't do anything about it that night, I just noticed. The itch grew a little more. This is where I should tell you about Miguel. Miguel Ortiz worked nights same as me. He was around 40, and he'd been at the yard a lot longer than I had. Miguel was friendly, but a little guarded, the kind of guy who'd seen enough in his years on the docks that things didn't rattle him easy. We started taking our coffee breaks together most nights. It wasn't planned, it just happened, the way friendships at work happen. Two guys standing around a bad vending machine at 1 in the morning, talking about nothing, and then one day it's not nothing anymore, it's a friendship. Miguel was the first one to say something out loud about Warehouse 6. We were on break, both of us leaning against the wall outside, him drinking his coffee black, me with too much sugar in mine. He said, almost like a joke, "You notice they don't let anybody near Warehouse 6 anymore." I said yeah, I'd noticed. He didn't say much else that night. He just gave me a look, the kind of look where you can tell somebody's thinking about something they're not ready to say yet. I let it go. I figured he'd tell me when he was ready. Over the next 2 weeks, more small things happened. New security guards started showing up, not from the regular contracted company we always used, guys I recognized, guys who waved at you and talked about their weekends. These were different. Plain black jackets, no name badges, no small talk. They stood near Warehouse 6 and near the newer, unmarked ships that kept arriving. They didn't talk to the regular yard workers. They just watched. I'd walk past them on my rounds and feel their eyes on me the whole way, even though they never said a word. I started paying more attention, not because I'd decided to investigate anything. I want to be clear about that I wasn't some detective, I was just a guy doing rounds, but because my instincts, the ones you build up doing the same job for you, were telling me something was off with how the place was being run. I noticed the odd ships arrived at strange hours, always around 2 or 3 in the morning, always unloaded fast, always gone from the dock within a night or two. Regular cargo doesn't move like that. I knew that because I'd worked around regular cargo long enough to know its normal pace. Regular cargo sits. It waits for trucks, for paperwork, for inspections. This stuff moved like somebody wanted it gone before the sun came up. One night I heard sounds coming from inside Warehouse 6. Not machine sounds, voices, muffled low like people talking, maybe more than a few of them. I stood outside that warehouse for a minute, in the dark, listening, and my heart was going faster than it should have been for just standing still. I didn't investigate. I told myself it was none of my business, and I didn't want to lose my job over something I probably misunderstood. I want you to understand that about me. I wasn't brave, not back then. I had a kid depending on me and a job I needed, and those two things were louder in my head than curiosity was. I mentioned the voices to Miguel the next night, over coffee, the way you'd mention anything strange, not thinking too hard about it. His face changed. Just slightly, but I caught it. I'd known him long enough by then to catch small things. He told me to keep my head down, not to go looking for trouble. Then, almost as an afterthought, like it was slipping out of him without him meaning it to, he said his cousin used to work day crew and quit suddenly a few months back, right after Warehouse 6 got its new lock. He said his cousin wouldn't talk about why he quit, just said it was better not to ask questions around here. That sat with me for days. Better not to ask questions around here. Like this wasn't new. Like something had been going on for a while, and the people who got too close either left on their own or were made to leave. About a month into all this, Miguel showed me something on his phone during a break. It was a photo he'd taken a few nights earlier from a distance of one of the unmarked ships being unloaded. In the photo, there were shapes on the dock covered by tarps, and next to them were people, not dock workers in uniform. People in regular clothes, thin, huddled together, being moved by two of the black jacket guards toward a box truck. The photo was blurry and dark, taken quick, the kind of photo you take when your hands are shaking and you're scared of being seen taking it. But it was enough. It was enough to make my stomach turn over. Miguel said he didn't know what he was looking at, but he didn't like it, and he was scared to ask anyone directly because of what happened to his cousin. That was the moment things shifted for me. Before that photo, it was something's off. After that photo, it was something is seriously wrong. I remember sitting there with his phone in my hand, looking at that picture, and my thoughts were a mess. Part of me wanted to go to the police right then, that same night. Another part of me thought about my job, about Mia, about the fact that I didn't actually know what I was looking at. Was it smuggling goods, migrants being moved illegal, something worse I didn't know? And not knowing ate at me more than knowing would have. Me and Miguel agreed to keep our eyes open together, but not do anything rash. Two guys with steady jobs and responsibilities, trying to figure out if what we were seeing was worth risking everything over. That felt like the responsible thing to do. Looking back, I still think it was, even with everything that happened after. About a week after he showed me that photo, Miguel didn't show up for his shift. I figured he was sick. It happens. The next night, same thing. On the third night, I asked the shift supervisor, and he told me Miguel had put in his notice and wasn't coming back. That didn't add up. Miguel never mentioned quitting to me, not once, and we talked almost every night. He just bought a used truck 2 weeks before, and he was still making payments on it. People don't do that if they're planning on walking away from their paycheck. Nobody buys a truck they're about to stop being able to afford. I tried calling him. No answer. I texted him nothing. I went to the address he'd mentioned once, a small rental house on the west side of town, and found it empty. Curtains gone, no car in the driveway. It looked like somebody had cleared it out fast. A neighbor told me a moving truck had come in the middle of the night a few days before and took everything, and that she never actually saw Miguel leave. She just saw the truck. I stood on that sidewalk for a long time, looking at that empty house, and something in me changed. This wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't just something's going on at the yard. Someone I knew, someone I trusted, was gone, and the explanation I'd been given didn't match what I was seeing with my own eyes. I had a lot of nights after that where I lay awake thinking about what to do. Part of me wanted to let it go. For my own safety, for Mia's safety. I told myself Miguel probably just needed to leave town for some reason he didn't want to explain. I told myself I was imagining connections that weren't there. I told myself all kinds of things, trying to talk myself into feeling okay about doing nothing. But I kept thinking about Miguel's face when he showed me that photo. And I kept thinking that maybe he'd gotten into trouble because I hadn't told him to stop looking, because I'd sat there with him and agreed we should keep watching. That guilt sat on my chest like a weight, and it didn't go away no matter how many nights I tried to sleep it off. I decided, after a lot of back and forth in my head, that I couldn't just let it go. Not because I wanted to be some kind of hero. I want to be honest about that. I've never thought of myself as brave. I just couldn't stop thinking about him, so I started quietly gathering information. I didn't tell anyone at work what I was doing. I started small. There were old shipping manifests that sometimes ended up in the break room trash, and I started fishing them out and taking them home. I noted the ship names. When I searched those names later on my laptop at the kitchen table, after Mia was asleep, some of them didn't match anything I could find in any public shipping registry. Some existed, but were registered as scrapped or decommissioned years earlier. Ships that were supposed to not exist anymore, showing up at our dock in the middle of the night. I started staying a little later after my shifts, watching from a distance, careful not to be seen near Warehouse 6 or the newer dock where the odd ships came in. I bought a cheap notebook and started keeping a private log, dates and times, nothing fancy. It was slow, careful, working-class investigating, nothing like what you see in movies. I was scared the whole time. My hands would sweat holding that notebook. I'd check over my shoulder every few minutes even when there was nobody around. I kept telling myself I'd stop after just one more night of watching, and then the next night I'd tell myself the same thing again. I also started noticing the yard owner more, Frank Hollies. Before all this, I'd barely interacted with the man. He used to only show up during the day for inspections, walking around in his nice jacket while the rest of us worked in our coveralls. Now he was around some nights too, always near Warehouse 6. Always talking quiet with the black jacket guards. I started to understand that whatever was happening, Hollies was at the center of it, not some manager just following somebody else's orders, the center. Through some careful digging, an old friend of mine who worked at the county records office, and some insurance filings that were technically public record if you knew where to look, I found something that started connecting pieces together. Blackstone Shipyard had filed insurance claims on 3 ships in the past 2 years, all of them reported as lost at sea or damaged beyond repair during storms, all of them insured for amounts way higher than what those old ships were probably worth. And here's the thing that made my hands go cold when I saw it. I recognized two of those exact ship names from the manifests I'd been copying down. Ships that, according to the yard's own paperwork I'd found, had never actually left the dock on the nights they were supposedly lost at sea. That gave me my first real theory. Holly's was running some kind of insurance fraud, sinking or faking the loss of old ships for the payouts. But that still didn't explain the people in Miguel's photo. It didn't explain the locked warehouse. It didn't explain Miguel disappearing. I started to suspect these were two connected but separate things. The insurance fraud was how Holly's funded things, and the people moving was something else entirely. Maybe smuggling migrants for profit. Maybe something worse that I didn't want to think about yet. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late one night, papers spread out in front of me, and feeling this creeping dread settle in my chest. I'd started out wanting to find out what happened to Miguel. Now I was looking at something so much bigger than I'd expected, and it scared me in a way that was hard to put into words. I decided I needed to see inside Warehouse 6 myself. I want to slow down here and tell this part carefully, because it was one of the most frightening things I've ever done, and I remember every second of it. I waited for a night when I knew Holly's and the guards would be occupied on the far dock, unloading one of the ships. I had a set of maintenance tools with me, ones I used for regular yard work, and I told myself if anybody caught me I could claim it was yard business, even though I knew that excuse wouldn't hold up for a second if anybody really looked at me. I walked toward Warehouse 6 in the dark. My legs felt heavy the whole way, like I was walking through water. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in my ears. When I got to the door, I worked the tools into the hasp of that newer padlock, and my hands were shaking so bad I dropped the tool twice before I got it to catch. When it finally gave, the sound of the chain hitting the ground felt like a gunshot in that quiet yard, and I froze for a full minute, listening, sure somebody was going to come running. Nobody came. I pushed the door open slow, and I stepped inside. It wasn't what I expected. Most of it was just like it used to be, scrap metal piled up in the back, dust in the air, the smell of old rust and motor oil. But there was a section walled off with plywood that hadn't been part of the original building. A rough room built inside the warehouse, with a heavy door on it, a small generator running just outside for power, and blankets and empty food containers scattered near it. Like people had been kept there, recently, but it was empty now. I found a name written on the plywood wall in pencil, faint, like someone had pressed light on purpose so it wouldn't be noticed by whoever was watching them. A name and a date, maybe 2 weeks earlier. I didn't recognize the name, but the fact that it was there, scratched into that wall in secret, told me everything I needed to know. People really had been held in this room. Then I found the drum. In a metal drum near the back, there was a stack of laminated ID cards and passports. Foreign, different nationalities, some clearly fake, some maybe real. I stood there holding one of them up in the dim light from my phone, and I felt sick. This wasn't about cargo. It wasn't about scrap metal. This was about moving people, and the way that room was built, hidden and locked from the outside, told me these people hadn't been free to leave. I took photos with my phone, my hands shaking so bad the pictures came out blurry the first few times. And I got out of that warehouse as fast as I could without running, resetting the lock as best I could so it wouldn't be obvious somebody had been inside. I drove home that night going the speed limit exactly, both hands on the wheel, and I sat in my parked car outside my apartment for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. Back home, I couldn't sleep. I went through the photos on my phone over and over, and I had to decide what to do next. My first instinct was to go straight to the police. But then I remembered something Miguel had said once, almost in passing, about his cousin trying to talk to a local police contact, once about weird stuff at the yard, and nothing ever coming of it. Shortly after that, his cousin lost his job. That planted a doubt in me. Maybe the local police couldn't be trusted. Maybe Holly's had connections with the harbor patrol, or somebody on the local force was being paid to look the other way. I spent a restless few days turning that over in my head. I started being more careful about who I talked to, even outside of work. I didn't want to be distracted at Mia's school events, but I couldn't stop thinking about that plywood room. I decided the safest path was to gather more solid evidence before I went to anyone, and to go outside the local system entirely. Maybe a state agency. Maybe a journalist who'd covered organized crime or trafficking before, somebody with no connection to my town at all. I found a reporter named Carla Whitfield. She'd written a story a year earlier about a similar smuggling ring that got busted 2 states over. I reached out to her anonymous at first, through an email account I made just for this, without giving her my name or the yard's name yet. I was just testing the waters, asking general questions about how these things get reported safely, how people protect themselves. She wrote back, cautious but interested, and that started a slow thread that ran through the rest of everything that happened, me feeding her information a little at a time, trying to protect myself while I built a case. This is where things started getting personal and dangerous in a way they hadn't before. A few nights after my trip into Warehouse 6, I noticed the padlock had been changed again, and one of the black jacket guards seemed to watch me a little too closely during my rounds. Nothing happened outright, nobody said anything to me, but the feeling of being watched settled into my body in a way I couldn't shake. My hands would shake a little when I clocked in for my shift. I found myself avoiding eye contact with people I used to nod hello to. I started double-checking that my phone was hidden deep in my jacket pocket, like they could somehow see through the fabric to the photos inside. Then something happened that turned my fear into something much more real. I came home one night to find my apartment door unlocked. I'm sure I locked it. I always lock it, every single time, it's just habit. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was obviously moved. But a kitchen drawer was open, one I never use, the one with old batteries and rubber bands, and it felt wrong. It felt like somebody had been there just to let me know they could get in if they wanted to, just to send a message. I didn't tell Mia anything was wrong. I didn't want to scare her. But I started walking her to school myself instead of letting her take the bus, even though it made me late for sleep some mornings. I started sleeping with a bat next to my bed, right where I could reach it without even opening my eyes. Those weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I was exhausted all the time, that deep kind of tired that comes from being scared for too long without a break. I couldn't always tell if I was being paranoid or if the threat was real, and not knowing which one it was made everything worse. I wanted so bad to protect my daughter, but I didn't even know exactly what I was protecting her from, and that uncertainty sat in my chest like a stone. I thought seriously about quitting. About walking away from the whole thing, forgetting Warehouse 6, forgetting the ledger I hadn't found yet, forgetting all of it. I let myself sit with that idea for a while, because it would have been the easy choice, the safe choice. Nobody would have blamed me for taking it. But I kept thinking about Miguel. I kept thinking that he might be in real trouble, maybe even dead, and that I couldn't just walk away from that, not after everything. I got a break when I managed to track down Miguel's cousin, the same one who'd quit day shift after finding trouble of his own. I found him through a mutual acquaintance, somebody who knew Miguel's family a little. I met him quietly at a diner outside of town, careful the whole drive there to make sure nobody was following me, checking my mirrors so much I probably looked more suspicious than if I'd just driven normal. Miguel's cousin was nervous at first, wouldn't look me in the eye for the first 10 minutes we sat there, but eventually he opened up. He told me that years back, Holly's had expanded the shipyard's operation beyond scrap metal and cargo. First it was small smuggling of untaxed goods. Then more recently, moving people for money. Mostly workers being brought in illegal and essentially sold into labor arrangements at farms and factories a few hours inland. He told me people who got too curious either got paid off, or threatened, or in at least one case he'd heard about, just vanished and were never mentioned again. He looked at me across that diner table and told me if Miguel really had gone digging, there was a real chance something happened to him, and that I should be very careful. He said Holly's wasn't even the top of the chain, just the local piece of something bigger, involving people with real money and reach. Some of it, he said, was possibly tied to the harbor patrol captain, a man named Ruiz, who used to get expensive gifts around the same time as the storm losses insurance claims Holly's had filed. I drove home from that diner more determined than I'd been, but also more scared than I'd ever been. The picture was bigger and darker than I'd expected. And now I had a name, Ruiz, that connected the corruption directly to the very people I would have gone to for help. If I'd walked into the local police station with what I had, I might have been walking straight into the wrong hands. The next stretch of time I spent building a case, slow, grinding, careful work. I bought a zoom lens secondhand so I could take photos from a safer distance, and I used it to get more pictures of the ships being unloaded, the people being moved, always from far enough away that I felt like I had a chance of not being seen. I kept copying manifests. I cross-referenced dates with the insurance filings I'd already found. And one night, I managed to get an audio recording on my phone of Holly's talking to one of the guards about a shipment getting through customs clean this time. It wasn't damning on its own, but it added to the pattern I was building. I kept in contact with Carla through that anonymous email, slowly gaining her trust, until eventually we agreed to a phone call. I didn't give her my real name yet, but I told her enough for her to realize this could be a major story. She warned me to be careful. She told me not to take unnecessary risks. She said she'd need more concrete evidence, ideally documentation with dates and ship names that tied everything together directly to Holly's, not just circumstantial patterns that could be explained away. That pushed me toward the most dangerous step I'd take yet. Getting into the shipyard's actual office, where the real paperwork was kept, someplace I'd never gone before because it was usually locked and occupied during the day. I picked a night when I knew Holly's would be away. I'd noticed a pattern over the weeks, him attending meetings on certain nights each month, likely with the people above him in whatever this was. I used my own set of yard keys, which gave me legitimate access to most buildings for maintenance reasons, to get into the office building itself. The inner office where Holly's worked was locked separate from the rest. I got in using a spare key I'd noticed hanging in the break room weeks before, unlabeled, one I'd taken a photo of at the time on nothing more than a hunch. That hunch paid off. The key fit. Inside, I found a locked filing cabinet, and I had to force it open, my hands shaking the whole time, sweat running down my back even though the office was cold. Inside that cabinet was a ledger, handwritten, not digital, the old-fashioned way. It listed shipment dates, amounts of money, and initials instead of full names. I didn't fully understand everything in it, but I photographed every page I could, working as fast as my hands would let me, careful to keep the pages in order. While I was doing that, I heard a vehicle pull into the yard outside, earlier than I'd expected. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I had to decide, right then, whether to keep photographing or get out immediately. I grabbed a few more pages, closed everything back up as close to how I'd found it as I could manage in the little time I had, and left the office just as I heard voices approaching from outside. I ducked behind a stack of shipping containers near the office, my back pressed against cold metal, and I watched Holly's and Ruiz, the harbor patrol captain, walk in together, talking low. I heard them talking about tightening security because someone's been asking questions on the docks lately. That confirmed something I'd been afraid of. I hadn't been imagining the danger. They knew someone was watching. They just didn't know it was me yet. I was so shaken after that close call that I didn't go back to the yard the next night. I called in sick for the first time in years, telling my supervisor I had the flu. I spent that whole day going through everything I'd gathered, the photos of Warehouse 6, the IDs and passports, the ledger pages, the insurance filings, the audio recording. I organized it all as best I could and sent a large, detailed package to Carla, along with a written account of everything, from the first strange ship all the way to Miguel's disappearance and the meeting I'd just witnessed. I also, as a safety measure, uploaded copies to a cloud storage account, and I mailed a physical backup drive to my sister in another state, with instructions not to open it unless she didn't hear from me within 2 weeks. I want to say that this mattered to me, doing that. It wasn't about being reckless. It was about making sure the truth would get out even if something happened to me. I thought about Mia the whole time I was packing that drive into an envelope. I thought about what she'd need to know, someday, if things went wrong. Carla called me that night. This time she was willing to use real names on the phone, since I'd given her enough by then that she trusted the situation was serious. She told me this was enough to bring in a state investigative unit that handled labor trafficking, and that she'd need a day or two to make contact with somebody reliable, somebody not connected to the local area at all. She told me to keep going to work as normal in the meantime, so I wouldn't tip anyone off, but to be careful. I went back to work the next night, trying to act normal, but I could feel eyes on me differently now. The guards seemed to watch me a beat too long as I walked past. Hollies passed by me in the yard and said something small, "You feeling better, Rays?" in a tone that felt like it meant more than the words themselves. I said, "Yeah, much better, thanks," and kept walking, and I don't think I breathed right again until I was 3 buildings away. My paranoia grew worse after that. Every sound at night made me flinch. Every set of headlights near my apartment made my stomach drop before I even saw what car it was. I started noticing every unfamiliar car parked anywhere near Mia's school, memorizing plates without even meaning to. 2 nights later, during my rounds, I got called over the radio to check a reported problem near Warehouse 6, something about a leak. This was strange right away, because nobody ever called me specifically to that building. Nobody ever wanted me near it. I stood there holding the radio for a long moment, thinking about not going, thinking about quitting right there, walking to my truck, driving home, and never coming back. But I also thought about how it would look if I didn't show up. It might confirm to them that I knew something, that I was avoiding that building on purpose. So I told myself I'd just check it quick and act normal, and I went. It was a setup. Hollies was there when I arrived, along with 2 of the guards. He didn't threaten me outright, not at first. He was calm, almost friendly. He asked me questions about my shifts, my hours, whether I'd noticed anything strange in the yard lately. He was testing me, and I knew it, and I did my best to play dumb, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I stuck to simple answers, said I hadn't noticed anything unusual. Then he mentioned, almost casual like it was nothing, that the office had been broken into recently and some paperwork had been disturbed. And he watched my face closely when he said it. I don't know how I kept my composure in that moment. Everything inside me was screaming. But on the outside, I just frowned a little like I was concerned and said that was strange, hope everything's okay. My mind was racing the whole time, thinking about Mia, thinking about the backup drive sitting with my sister, wondering if Hollies actually knew something for certain or if he was just testing everyone on shift the same way. Then one of the guards said something that changed everything. He mentioned seeing someone matching my build near the office building on the security footage from a few nights back, footage I hadn't known existed, an oversight in my planning that I hadn't accounted for. Hollies' expression changed, and I knew, right in that second, that I'd been caught. I didn't wait to hear what happened next. I turned and ran. I cut between shipping containers, using every bit of knowledge I had of that yard, knowledge built up over 2 years of walking it almost every single night. I knew things about that place they might not have expected me to use so well. I scraped my hands climbing over a low fence. I lost my footing on wet dock planks and nearly went down hard. My lungs were burning within a minute, and I could hear the guards behind me, shouting, their footsteps heavy on the concrete. There was no dramatic gunfire, no superhuman stunts. Just a scared, tired man running for his life across a dark industrial yard he knew better than the people chasing him. I made it to the perimeter fence near the older, unused part of the yard, where a section of chain link had been rusted and loose for years. I'd noticed it on rounds so many times before, never once thinking I'd have a reason to use it. I squeezed through the gap, tearing my jacket on the wire, feeling it scrape my back, and got out onto the road. I flagged down a passing car, a resident heading home from a late shift, somebody who had no idea what they were walking into. They gave me a ride away from the area, and I sat in the passenger seat shaking so hard I couldn't hold my own hand still. From a friend's phone, something that couldn't be traced back to me directly, I called Carla immediately and told her everything that had just happened. She told me she'd already made contact with a state investigator handling trafficking cases, somebody reliable, and that given what had just happened, given that I'd been physically chased, this needed to move immediately, rather than waiting for the slow, careful build-up we'd planned before. She arranged for me to meet the investigator directly, in a public place, that same night. I didn't go home first. I picked up Mia from a friend's house, where she'd been staying for a sleepover, and I told her everything was fine, but that we were taking a short trip. I remember her looking at me a little confused, half asleep still, but she trusted me, and she went along with it without asking too many questions. I drove us to a hotel in the next town over. I met Carla and the investigator, a woman named Agent Reyes Delgado, who worked with the state task force on labor trafficking, later that night. I handed over everything I had, the ledger photos. The photos of the drum full of IDs, though I clarified that the IDs themselves I had only photographed, never physically removed, and I wanted to be honest with her about exactly what I had and hadn't done. I explained the whole timeline, from the first strange ship all the way through Miguel's disappearance, all the way through the chase that had just happened a few hours before. The agent told me this matched other threads they'd been quietly investigating, involving several shipyards along the coast. She said my evidence, combined with what they already had, might be enough to move on Holly's and the operation soon, but that it would take a coordinated raid, not something that happened overnight. Then came the waiting. Me and Mia stayed in that motel for several days under a different name, paying with cash, me too scared to go back to my apartment for anything. I didn't go back to work. I called in a couple of times and then stopped answering when the yard called back, figuring correctly that my cover was already completely blown. Those days were some of the strangest of my life. I had time to think, and thinking was almost worse than the fear itself. I sat with my guilt over Miguel, turning it over and over. I sat with my fear for Mia, watching her sleep in that unfamiliar motel bed, wondering if I'd made the right choice bringing her along instead of leaving her somewhere safer, even though there wasn't really a safer place I could think of. I had doubts about whether I'd done the right thing, risking everything for people I'd never even met, mixed together with a certainty that I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd just kept quiet and let it keep going. I remember sitting on the edge of that motel bed one night while Mia slept, just staring at the wall, replaying the chase in my head over and over, wondering if Holly's people were out there right then, looking for me. There was one more scare during that stretch. We'd gone out for food one evening, just to get out of the motel room for a bit, and a black SUV seemed to follow us for a few blocks. My heart nearly stopped. I turned down 2 different streets just to see if it would follow, and it did for a while, and I was ready to just drive straight to a police station. Any police station, state or local, I didn't even care anymore. But then it turned off and it was nothing, just a random driver going the same direction we were. It was enough, though, to spike my fear all over again and make me realize just how on edge I'd become. After about a week, Agent Reyes Delgado called and told me the raid was happening that night. A coordinated operation between state police, federal agents, and even some vetted local officers who weren't compromised, specifically excluding Ruiz and anyone connected to him. She told me I didn't need to be there, that my part was done, but she'd update me once it was over. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with Mia in the motel room, watching the news apps on my phone refresh every few minutes, my leg bouncing the whole time. Around 2 in the morning, the news broke. A raid at Blackstone Shipyard, several arrests including Frank Holly's. A warehouse found containing evidence of a human trafficking and forced labor operation, along with confirmation of the earlier insurance fraud involving the falsely reported lost ships. The report mentioned officials had found conditions in a hidden section of one warehouse consistent with people being held there recently. Though most of the individuals believed to have been moved through the yard were unaccounted for at the time of the raid, having already been transported inland before the operation could act. I want to be honest about how that felt. It was a real win, a significant one. But it wasn't a clean, perfect ending, and I think it's important to say that clearly. Some of the people trafficked through that yard were found and helped in the weeks that followed as the investigation continued. Others were never located. That weighed on me then, and it still weighs on me now. In the weeks after the raid, I gave a full statement to investigators. I learned that Ruiz was also arrested, once his connection was confirmed through the ledger evidence I'd provided. Holly's tried at first to claim ignorance about everything, but the ledger and testimony from other arrested employees, including one of the black jacket guards who took a plea deal, made that hard for him to maintain. Miguel's fate never got a clean answer. Investigators weren't able to determine exactly what happened to him. There's a working theory, based on statements from some of the arrested guards, that Miguel confronted Holly's directly after being suspected of talking to outsiders, and that he was quietly paid off and threatened to leave town immediately, rather than being killed outright. But that was never fully confirmed. I never managed to reach him again. Letters I sent to old addresses came back undelivered every time. That ambiguity stayed with me. It still does. I think about him some nights even now, wondering where he ended up, wondering if he's okay, wondering if he thinks about that photo he showed me and wishes he never had. Me and Mia eventually moved to a new town, a fresh start. Funded partly by a settlement related to my cooperation with investigators, and partly by Carla's article, which got picked up nationally and brought some public attention my way, though I stayed away from most of the media attention out of caution. And out of wanting to keep Mia's life as normal as I could manage. I think about that shipyard a lot, even now. I think about the sound of that chain hitting the ground outside Warehouse 6. I think about the name written faint in pencil on that plywood wall. I think about running across that dark yard with my lungs burning, sure I was about to be caught. Some nights in my new town, in my new job, I still catch myself checking my rearview mirror out of habit, even though there's no reason to anymore. Hollies and Ruiz are facing their charges, but the larger network they were part of, the buyers, the people paying for cheap, controlled labor further inland, that was never fully identified or dismantled. I know that. I try not to let it eat at me too much, but I know it. I'll end this the way it actually ended for me, in a small, quiet moment, because that's the truth of it, not some big dramatic finish. I was sitting in the kitchen of our new apartment one evening, watching Mia do her homework at the table, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth the way it does when she's concentrating hard on something, and I felt grateful and uneasy at the same time. Grateful that we made it through, uneasy knowing that the full truth of what happened at that shipyard and to everyone who passed through it might never be completely known, but I did what I could. I told the truth when it mattered. And some nights that has to be enough.